The crash wasn't just the sound of $200 worth of buttercream and sugar hitting the marble floor. It was the sound of my precarious career shattering into a million sticky pieces. I was halfway across the main dining room of the Gilded Plate, balancing the 7-tiered wedding cake, a bespoke high-stakes monstrosity, when Julian, the restaurant's star waiter, moved. He didn't just accidentally bump me. He stopped, leaned slightly into the aisle and extended his polished leather shoe with practiced malice. I saw his reflection in the mirrored wall just before I went down. His eyes, usually sparkling with practiced charm for the patrons, were cold, predatory. The world tilted. Time slowed down enough for me to see the cake slide off the tray, a slow-motion avalanche of white frosting in shame. I landed hard on my knees, the silence of the room deafening. The bride gasped. Julian didn't help me up. He simply stepped over the wreckage, his custom-tailored jacket pristine, and offered the horrified wedding planner a perfectly executed, regretful shrug. "Terribly sorry," he murmured, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Some people just aren't cut out for high-pressure service, are they?" He didn't even look at me lying amidst the sugar and broken dreams. He had publicly, definitively, and deliberately humiliated me in front of the most important clients of the year. My hands trembled, not from the fall, but from the sudden, burning realization of the injustice. The heat rushed to my face, not from exertion, but from the searing shame of being reduced to a clumsy spectacle. I am Vivian and I am 45 years old. This job, events manager at the Gilded Plate, wasn't just a job. It was my entire safety net. After a brutal divorce that left me financially gutted and emotionally exhausted, this high-pressure, high-reward position was the one thing I had managed to build back for myself. It was the proof that I wasn't disposable. And in one cruel, calculated move, Julian had tried to dismantle it all. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply pushed myself up, ignoring the pain in my knee and the way my crisp white shirt was now streaked with pink raspberry filling. I looked at Julian, who was now expertly soothing the agitated mother of the groom, effortlessly charming his way out of responsibility. He caught my eye and gave me a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, a silent boast that he knew exactly what he had done and that I couldn't touch him. That smirk was the final straw. It was the moment the shame curdled into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Well, I decided right there, standing amidst the ruins of a $1,500 cake, that I would need a freezer large enough for a deep-sea fishing trawler. The waiter treated me like dirt, so I made sure he could never do it again. The immediate fallout was exactly what Julian had intended. Mr. Thompson, the owner, pulled me aside into his cramped, whiskey-scented office 10 minutes after the cleanup crew had mopped the floor. He didn't ask what happened. He simply stared at the stain on my shirt. "Vivian," he sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair, "that was incredibly unprofessional. Julian said you were rushing. You know how important the Miller account is." I opened my mouth to explain, to point out the deliberate trip, the malice. But the words died in my throat. I looked at the framed photos on his desk. Thompson and Julian laughing at the annual holiday party. Julian receiving the Employee of the Year award 2 years running. Julian was Thompson's golden boy, the charismatic frontman who could upsell a bottle of wine faster than anyone and whom Thompson believed was irreplaceable. I realized that if I accused Julian, I wouldn't just be questioning his character. I'd be questioning Thompson's judgment and his entire business model. I would be instantly fired for being combative and unstable. I closed my mouth. "You're right, Mr. Thompson," I said, my voice flat. "I was rushing. It won't happen again." He waved a dismissive hand, clearly relieved I hadn't pushed back. I walked out of that office knowing 2 things. First, Julian was untouchable through conventional means, and second, that protection was born not out of loyalty, but out of Thompson's own laziness and reliance on a charismatic facade. I wouldn't seek justice through confrontation. I would seek it through superior competence. The first step of my strategic long game was simple: observation. I needed to understand the mechanics of Julian's untouchability. Why was he so protected? It wasn't just charm, it was operational negligence on Thompson's part. Thompson was old school, focused entirely on the dining room experience and delegating all the tedious, crucial back-end work. Julian exploited this gap. I started watching him not with emotional fury, but with the cold, calculating eye of an auditor. I realized his brilliance was matched only by his profound sloppiness and sense of entitlement. He rarely clocked out on time, often took personal breaks that stretched for hours and treated the rest of the service staff like indentured servants. He was a performance, not a professional. Every time he snapped at a busser or left his assigned side work for someone else, I made a mental note. I began carrying a small, innocuous notebook, the kind I usually used for vendor quotes, and started logging the minutiae of his daily transgressions. Time stamps, witness initials, usually from the terrified kitchen staff, and specific details. This wasn't about petty complaints. This was about building a legally airtight case against a systemic problem. I wasn't going to get him fired for tripping me. I was going to get him fired for being a financial liability. My focus shifted from his social slights to his financial manipulations. I noticed Julian was always the one handling the cash drop at the end of the night, even though that was technically a manager's job. He'd charm the closing manager, usually the least experienced one, into letting him do it because he was so efficient. I started hanging around the back office after closing, pretending to organize event files. I watched Julian count the large party taps, the ones with automatic gratuity. He would meticulously count the cash, sign the ledger, and then with a barely perceptible flick of his wrist, slip a 20 or a 50 from the stack into the inside pocket of his jacket before dropping the bundle into the safe. It was quick, practiced, and almost invisible. It wasn't massive theft, maybe a couple of $100 a week, but it was consistent and it added up. This confirmed my hypothesis. Julian's arrogance stemmed from the belief that the system was too broken, and the management too complacent to ever catch him. He wasn't just rude, he was actively skimming from the business that protected him. I logged 3 specific instances, detailing the estimated amounts and the specific time codes on the security footage, which I knew Thompson never reviewed. The following Monday, Julian decided to escalate his campaign of casual cruelty. We were in the mandatory pre-shift staff meeting, discussing the upcoming holiday reservations. My domain. I was outlining the complex seating chart for a large corporate booking. Julian interrupted me loudly in front of 20 servers and busboys. Sorry, Vivian, but are we really taking seating advice from the woman who mistook a wedding cake for a bowling ball last week? A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room. My heart pounded, but I kept my face utterly blank. I felt the familiar hot rush of humiliation, but this time, it was immediately channeled into fuel. I didn't engage. I didn't even acknowledge the comment. I simply looked at the seating chart, tapped a specific table number and continued. Table 42 requires 2 dedicated servers due to the wine pairing complexity, which, Julian, you would know if you actually reviewed the event notes instead of just relying on the auto-gratuity. The subtle counter-jab landed, cutting through his confidence just slightly. He scowled, realizing I hadn't been rattled. That night I stayed late pulling old inventory reports. I knew Julian was responsible for liquor inventory on the weekends. I cross-referenced the reported sales with the stock depletion. The numbers didn't match. Not by a little. The discrepancy was significant, suggesting either gross incompetence or organized theft. The small cash schemes were just the tip of Julian's iceberg. My strategy crystallized. I needed to become indispensable in the areas Julian was negligent, not to impress Thompson, but to gain access to the operational systems I needed to dismantle Julian's kingdom. I volunteered to take over the dreaded weekly inventory reconciliation, a task everyone hated because it involved endless spreadsheets and dealing with archaic software. Thompson looked at me like I had offered to clean the grease traps with a toothbrush. Vivian, you're the events manager. That's beneath you. On the contrary, Mr. Thompson, I replied smoothly, the events side requires perfect inventory control. I want to streamline the process. It'll save us money. He shrugged, granting me full administrative access to the POS system, the inventory management software and the vendor payment portal. He had just handed me the keys to his entire operation. I spent the next 3 weekends mapping the flow of goods and cash, identifying every loophole Julian exploited. I found that he was consistently shorting the high-end liquor stock and manipulating the electronic voids, canceling high-value orders after the customer had already paid cash, pocketing the difference and hiding the paper trail in the operational chaos. The total financial loss Julian was responsible for was staggering. I had transitioned from documenting bad behavior to uncovering systemic fraud, all while Julian remained blissfully unaware, busy being charming. I began my campaign of operational excellence, subtly tightening the screws around Julian. I introduced a mandatory dual signature requirement for all cash voids over $100, citing new insurance requirements. Julian grumbled but couldn't openly object without looking suspicious. I also took over vendor scheduling, optimizing delivery times and cross-referencing invoices against receipts. This was tedious, thankless work, but it gave me a direct line to every single expenditure. Thompson, meanwhile, was starting to rely on me. When the reservation system crashed, he called me, not Julian. When the kitchen staff complained about outdated equipment, he asked me for a budget analysis, not Julian. I was the quiet, effective engine room of the restaurant. Julian was the flashy hood ornament that everyone admired but that did nothing to move the car forward. I carefully cultivated this image of quiet competence, ensuring Thompson saw me as the solution to his ongoing headaches, not the source of them. I was gaining leverage with every perfectly balanced spreadsheet and every vendor discount I negotiated. The more I fixed the underlying systems, the more exposed Julian became. Julian, sensing a shift in the operational atmosphere, started viewing me with suspicion, but misinterpreted my actions entirely. He thought I was simply trying to impress Thompson to get a better event commission. He started leaving passive-aggressive notes on my desk, suggesting I focus on pretty flowers and leave the real business to the people who understood it. I just smiled, a small, tight smile that never reached my eyes. His arrogance was a self-destruct mechanism, and I was happy to let him pull the lever. I used my new access to the POS system to install a low-key, non-invasive digital tracking module that cross-referenced server input times with table turn times. This was allegedly to improve efficiency, but its real purpose was to create an undeniable timeline of Julian's extended, unauthorized breaks and his chronic time theft, showing exactly how many hours he was paid for while he was actually sitting at the bar across the street, flirting with patrons. I was building a case that was not only about fraud but about a fundamental breach of employment contract due to documented time card manipulation. Every action I took was meticulously legal, documented, and entirely justified under the guise of operational improvement. Julian's theft became more brazen as his confidence swelled. He was convinced that because Thompson never questioned him, no one else would dare. One rainy Tuesday night, a high-roller patron left a substantial cash tip on a $1,200 dinner bill. The tip was meant to be split among the support staff as per policy, but I watched Julian intercept the closing busser, charming the young man into believing he would handle the distribution. The money never made it to the tip pool. I knew this because I had implemented a new mandatory digital tip-out system for all pooled tips, which Julian had vehemently opposed, claiming it was too impersonal. I had the digital proof that the pooled tips were short, and the busser's statement confirming Julian took the cash. I didn't report it. I simply added the details to my private dossier, cross-referencing the time, the table number, and the amount stolen. This incident was critical. It wasn't just theft from the company but theft from his colleagues, demonstrating a moral rot that would be impossible for even Thompson to defend publicly. I was no longer just collecting data on money, I was collecting data on character. Thompson was ecstatic when I presented the results of my vendor audit. I had managed to renegotiate the linen and fresh produce contracts, saving the gilded plate nearly $40,000 annually. He clapped me on the shoulder, beaming. "Vivian, you're a miracle worker. I knew you were good, but this is real money." He promised me a bonus, a measly $500, but the real win was the immediate, unshakable trust one had earned. I had proven my financial intelligence and loyalty to the business's bottom line. I used this moment of high praise to push for the next phase, a complete upgrade of the cash handling and inventory control procedures. "With the money I saved us, Mr. Thompson," I argued, "we can afford the new encrypted POS system. It will prevent errors and protect us against unforeseen liabilities." Thompson, blinded by the $40,000 saving, immediately approved the $8,000 expenditure. Julian, who had relied on the old, porous system for his manipulations, looked furious when the new terminals were installed. He tried to complain, claiming the new system was too slow, but Thompson shut him down instantly, citing my recent financial performance. The net was tightening, and Julian didn't even realize he was standing in the center of the trap. The new encrypted POS system was my ultimate weapon. It logged every single transaction, every void, every return, and every cash count with an immutable digital timestamp and linked it to the specific server ID. Within 2 weeks, the system began flagging anomalies linked exclusively to Julian's shifts. The digital paper trail was cleaner and more damning than my handwritten notes. I spent late nights exporting the data, creating clean, summarized reports that showed a clear pattern of manipulation. I had enough evidence now to not only terminate Julian but to pursue criminal charges, should Thompson decide to protect him. My dossier was no longer just internal office gossip. It was a prosecutable case file. I had detailed records of over $15,000 in documented theft and time fraud over the last year alone. I printed the full report, bound it in a professional leather folder, and locked it in my personal safe deposit box outside the restaurant. I knew Julian's arrogance was about to be tested. He was still operating under the assumption that he was the most powerful person in the room, but he didn't realize I now held the operational truth of the entire establishment in my hands. The external pressure began to mount, accelerating the timeline perfectly. A new, trendy Michelin-starred restaurant opened just 3 blocks away, poaching the Gilded Plate's high-end clientele. Our revenue dipped by 25% in the first quarter, sending Thompson into a quiet panic. He started cutting costs haphazardly, firing a few kitchen staff and reducing the quality of ingredients. Classic short-sighted moves that only exacerbated the problem. The staff morale plummeted, but Julian, oblivious to the bigger picture, continued his extravagant spending habits, convinced his job was secure. He started openly mocking Thompson's financial nervousness, cracking jokes about the old dinosaur running the place. This was the critical inflection point. The Gilded Plate was hemorrhaging money externally, but internally, Julian was accelerating the bleed with his fraud and inefficiency. The restaurant was failing and I was the only one with the data to diagnose the true internal rot. Thompson, visibly aged and stressed, called me into his office one afternoon. He looked defeated. "Vivian, the bank is calling our line of credit. We need a serious overhaul. I need someone who understands the numbers, someone I can trust." He then made the move I had been strategically maneuvering for. "I'm making you an operational consultant, effective immediately. I need you to do a deep dive into every department and find the waste. No one is off limits." I accepted the promotion with a quiet, professional nod, hiding the triumphant surge that shot through me. I was no longer just the events manager. I had the official mandate to scrutinize every financial and operational detail of the restaurant. My first official act as operational consultant was to review the payroll and expense reports for the entire front-of-house staff. It was here, buried deep in Thompson's personal expense ledger, that I found the first major twist. A series of small, unexplained cash payments labeled discretionary management. I cross-referenced the dates. They matched the dates of Julian's most egregious cash schemes from 6 months prior. Thompson hadn't just been ignoring Julian's theft. He had been covering it up, paying back the difference out of his own pocket to avoid the scandal of firing his star waiter. The stakes had just doubled. The revelation of Thompson's complicity added a layer of delicious complexity to my plan. He hadn't just been naive, he was compromised. His fear of losing Julian's charisma was greater than his fear of financial ruin. Now Julian's arrogance wasn't just protected by Thompson's delusion, it was protected by his owner's desperation. This knowledge gave me immense power. I knew that when the time came I wouldn't just be presenting Julian's crimes. I would be presenting Thompson's managerial failures. Julian, sensing the restaurant's instability, accelerated his fraudulent activity, perhaps believing he could skim enough to jump ship before the place sank. He started padding checks with phantom items, adding expensive wines that were never poured, and using the old manual receipt books for small cash-only tables, keeping the entire transaction off the new POS system. He was creating a chaotic mess, a frantic effort to grab as much as possible before the end. I watched, documented, and waited, knowing that the bigger the theft, the harder he would fall. My new role granted me full access to the security camera feeds, which I began reviewing meticulously. I found an incident from 2 weeks prior that was the absolute proof of Julian's moral bankruptcy. A regular patron, a sweet elderly woman who always paid cash, had left a vintage signed first edition book as a generous gift for the staff, intending for them to sell it and split the proceeds. On the security footage, I watched Julian intercept the gift, claim it was too valuable for the staff to handle, and then the next day sell it to a rare book dealer for $800, pocketing the entire amount. This was beyond theft. It was betrayal of the staff and a violation of the goodwill of a loyal customer. I saved the video clip, time-stamped and categorized. This evidence would ensure Julian wasn't just fired for accounting errors. He would be blacklisted for moral turpitude. The gilded plate was deteriorating rapidly, and Julian was now actively looting the establishment, like a rat leaving a sinking ship. A ship I was now in charge of navigating. Thompson, overwhelmed by the debt and the looming threat of bankruptcy, officially promoted me to Director of Operations, granting me the authority to hire, fire, and implement any financial controls necessary for survival. "Vivian," he pleaded, his voice cracking, "save us. I'll give you a percentage of the profits if you can stabilize this ship." I accepted the title and the power, knowing the stabilization required radical surgery. My first official act was to mandate a company-wide, third-party audit of all inventory, led by me. Julian immediately complained loudly, calling the audit invasive and distrustful. I met his outrage with calm professionalism. "It's standard procedure for a business facing restructuring, Julian," I stated, my voice even. "I need to ensure we are maximizing every resource. Your cooperation is mandatory." He backed down, realizing he couldn't fight the official mandate, but the look in his eyes told me he finally recognized me as a threat. He was starting to sweat, and I knew the time for the final decisive move was imminent. The inventory audit, led by a small external firm I hired, was a disaster for Julian. We found massive discrepancies in the high-end wine cellar and the premium Scotch reserves, items Julian was exclusively responsible for serving. The external auditors flagged the losses as highly suspicious, noting that the stock depletion significantly exceeded reported sales, even accounting for breakage. Julian tried to blame the new bus staff, claiming they were careless, but the system I had installed tracked key access and service times. The evidence pointed only to him. To further seal the trap, I introduced a new mandatory rule. All remaining cash tips were to be processed via a secure, digital platform linked directly to the payroll system, eliminating all physical cash handling by servers. Julian was apoplectic. "This is an insult to our integrity," he fumed. "It's protecting our assets, Julian," I corrected, my tone glacial, "and ensuring every employee receives their fair share." I had cut off his last, easiest avenue for skimming. The tension between us became a palpable, icy wall. Julian cornered me one afternoon near the walk-in freezer, his face tight with controlled rage. "You know, Vivian," he hissed, leaning in, "some people forget where they came from. You were just the events lady who dropped the cake. You're getting a little too big for your tailored britches." He was trying to intimidate me, to remind me of the humiliation, to make me flinch. I didn't. I met his gaze, my hand resting casually on the security fob for the freezer, which also happened to be linked to the silent alarm. "I remember exactly where I came from, Julian," I said softly, my voice devoid of emotion. "That's why I understand the importance of flawless execution and accountability. Unlike some people, I don't rely on charm to hide incompetence." His eyes widened slightly. He realized I wasn't scared and I wasn't going to be bullied. He had mistaken my silence for weakness. He had mistaken my hard work for desperation. He backed away slowly, the realization dawning that he had underestimated the person he had tried to destroy. The final, undeniable proof arrived on a Saturday night. Julian, desperate to make up for the lost skimming opportunities, attempted a massive, reckless fraud. A high-value corporate client paid their $5,000 bill with an American Express card. Julian processed the card, printed the receipt, and then used the old administrative override code he still possessed to manually input a cash return for the full amount, intending to pocket the $5,000 from the daily cash flow before the electronic records reconciled. But the new encrypted POS system I installed was designed to flag exactly this type of double-entry manipulation. An immediate high-priority alert flashed on my personal tablet. I watched the transaction history in real time. I immediately called the auditing firm and the credit card company, freezing the funds and flagging the transaction as fraudulent. I had him. The theft was not only documented digitally, but the money was now secure, proving intent and action beyond any doubt. I didn't need to wait until morning. I called Thompson immediately. Thompson arrived, looking pale and frantic, and met me in my office at 1 a.m. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I placed the massive leather-bound dossier on the desk, opened to the $5,000 fraud alert, and then handed him the summary of the $15,000 in previous thefts, complete with video timestamps and auditor notes. "Julian tried to steal $5,000 tonight, Mr. Thompson," I said calmly. "It's documented, frozen, and the police could be involved by morning. This isn't just theft, it's felony fraud. And due to your previous discretionary payments, you are legally compromised." Thompson looked sick. He tried to argue, clutching at his desperation. "But, the face of the restaurant. The customers love him." "The face of the restaurant is a criminal liability who has cost you upwards of $50,000 in a year, and the customers will stop loving him when the auditors shut us down," I countered, my voice sharp. "You have two choices. Handle this internally, terminate him immediately for gross misconduct, and let me handle the legal cleanup, or risk a public scandal that will bankrupt you entirely." He stared at the evidence, the reality of his own managerial negligence finally crashing down on him. He nodded, defeated. "Do it, Vivian. Get him out." Julian walked into my office the next morning, swaggering, convinced he was being called in for a minor reprimand. He looked bored. He sat down without being invited. "What's the emergency, Vivian? Did you run out of ribbon?" I didn't rise to the bait. Thompson stood awkwardly behind me, unable to look Julian in the eye. I slid the evidence binder across the desk, opened to the page detailing the $5,000 fraud. Julian's face went white. The swagger vanished instantly, replaced by sheer animal fear. He started stammering, trying to construct a lie, a defense, claiming it was a system error. I cut him off, my voice steady. "The funds are frozen, Julian. The credit card company has been notified. This is not negotiable. You are terminated, effective immediately, for gross financial misconduct and theft of company property. Your final check will be mailed." He looked at Thompson, pleading for the usual protection. Thompson just looked away. Julian finally turned back to me, his eyes burning with hatred, realizing I had engineered his entire downfall. "You did this," he spat. "You petty, jealous." I stood up, towering over him, and called security. "Escort Mr. Julian out of the building. And ensure he is not allowed back on the premises." He was dragged out, screaming about lawyers, his arrogance dissolving into pathetic desperation. Julian's attempt to find new work was met with cold, immediate rejection. I didn't need to actively sabotage him. I just needed to ensure the truth, professionally sanitized, was accessible. Through my network of industry contacts, I let it be known that Julian was terminated for severe financial misconduct. In the high-stakes world of fine dining, where trust and reputation are paramount, financial misconduct is a death sentence. No reputable establishment would risk hiring a server known to skim cash and steal from his colleagues. His network, built entirely on false charm and Thompson's protection, evaporated. The industry blacklisted him. The man who had based his entire identity on being the irreplaceable star was now utterly disposable, his arrogance having blinded him to the fact that competence always beats charisma in the long run. He lost his career not because I was petty, but because his own actions provided the irrefutable evidence for his professional destruction. With Julian gone and the financial leaks plugged, I executed the full restructuring. Thompson, humbled and exhausted, gave me complete autonomy. I purged the remaining toxic staff, implemented robust, transparent financial controls, and restored the integrity of the tip pool, instantly boosting morale among the loyal staff. The gilded plate stabilized, and within a year, revenue was up 35%. Thompson, recognizing the new reality, offered me a massive stake in the company and officially named me the managing partner. I am now the one who signs the checks, the one who sets the policy, and the one who decides who is worth the risk. The gilded plate is no longer Julian's stage. It is my empire, built on spreadsheets, accountability, and the quiet power of undeniable performance. I still see Thompson occasionally, but he treats me with immense respect, the memory of his past failures a constant, silent reminder of who truly saved his business. I look out of my new, spacious office overlooking the city. I am 50 now, thriving and completely secure. I often think back to that moment on the marble floor, covered in raspberry filling and Julian's smug, hateful smirk. He tried to reduce me to a clumsy, disposable failure. But that moment of humiliation was the necessary catalyst. It taught me that seeking validation or justice through emotional confrontation is a waste of time. True power lies in strategic intelligence, patience, and making yourself so indispensable that your success becomes the only viable option for everyone around you. I never heard from Julian again, and I never will. My revenge wasn't about making him suffer. It was about proving my worth to myself, and ensuring that the system that allowed him to thrive was dismantled forever. I didn't just walk away from the dirt he treated me like. I paved a new golden path over it,